So this is targeting abusive and neglectful parenting and the associated impairments of children's health and development, a modular systemic intervention, building on strengths, modifying difficulties. I very much want to thank the editorial group that have helped, the support and advisors from the Department of Education, South London and Maudsley, NHS Foundation and Trust, Faithful Foundation, SWAY, and colleagues from the United States who've been so important in terms of ideas and development, and the writing group who've really set to write and develop a series of modules which we hope will really help practitioners work in this complex field. So child maltreatment is not a disorder, but a context in which children and young people are exposed to abusive and neglectful parenting. You'll find the slides are slightly different from the PowerPoint you've got in your pack, but we will make sure that this is available on the website. And I'm sorry, I should have skipped back a little bit. Please fill in the evaluation forms. Liz is looking at me and saying, Arnon, you forgot to mention the evaluation forms. So please do fill those in because it's so important to know, get some feedback on how this day has been for yourself. So apologies about that. So the aim of intervention is to prevent the recurrence of child maltreatment and to promote the recovery from associated impairment. So it's an overall approach to evidence-based assessments of parenting and family life, the analysis of the impact of harm on the child, assessment of the risks of future harm and the prospects for intervention, and then being able to provide an evidence-based approach to testing the capacities of parents to modify the abusive and neglectful parenting and to reverse the child's impairments. Designed to be used by a wide range of practitioners, providing building blocks and a toolkit for developing foundation skills in intervention. It adopts a modular approach, each module providing a stepwise approach to delivering an evidence-based intervention. It's very important to motivate and support parents who, as we've already heard, have suffered significant disadvantage and adversity to address abusive and neglectful parenting and harmful impacts. It integrates a variety of practice elements distilled from 40 papers of evidence-based research on effective outcomes for abusive and neglectful parenting. The common practice elements framework described by Barth and his colleagues describe generic components cutting across many distinct treatment protocols, identifying specific clinical procedures common to evidence-based practices. And you'll see how we've tried to develop a series of modules which are comparable to those which are delivered in evidence-based approaches and a more discrete approach. Systemic because of the need to take a broad view of the interlinking parent, family and community factors, assessing the profile of harm, the risk of future harm, and prospects for change. Needs to be multidisciplinary support, supervision, the team around the child, and perhaps, so importantly, the team around the practitioner, not just the team around the child, but the practitioner, to support the practitioner in terms of being able to effect change. An approach is provided that fits each of the main forms of abuse and associated impairment, adapted to meet a variety of the multiple forms of maltreatment, fitting the individual child and family. And we're just beginning the piloting process to see whether this approach works in various work contexts, and which we hope will be the next stage of our approach, having developed what we feel could be a helpful approach to test, is this in fact helpful? And we would welcome interest in those of you who might be interested to pilot some of these approaches in your teams. In addition to the common elements approach, there's a common factors framework, personal and interpersonal components of intervention, creation of an alliance, client motivation, therapist, intervention factors are responsible for treatment outcomes to a significant extent. And I think the presentation from Minna Dorm and Duncan McLean demonstrated how vital those general factors are, and particularly the framework of trying to really help people become mindful, to become really thoughtful, rather than to act, which is such a core element in maltreatment. I've already talked about the different stages of intervention. The sort of indications which we think this approach could be valuable for frontline practitioners is when there's a specific risk to an unborn child and there are current parental difficulties and previous harm, the sort of area that Jane has been speaking about, where the parents under pressure has such a valuable impact. Where there's evidence of abusive and neglectful parenting working in various contexts, where there's not necessarily any immediate impairment of the child and child's functioning, but where there's a potential, or whether there is actual harm. Children, young people, where there's evidence of impairment of health and development at home or in alternative care. Family intervention teams working with multiple problems. Parents with physical, mental health or substance abuse difficulties, where there's a need for working both on parenting as well as the issues which are affecting the parent. We feel that more specialist intervention is required when there's, for example, serious sexual abuse by a parent that requires specialist levels of intervention. In the manual, we have modules to address children and young people where there's sexually harmful behavior, or where there's a parent who's coping in a family where there has been serious sexual abuse, but we feel that sexual abuse by an adult parent requires more specialist intervention. Some children have such serious self-harming, such serious aggression or serious harmful, sexually harmful behavior that, again, more specialist intervention is needed. And sometimes the severity of adult individual and family problems, substance abuse, domestic violence, requires certainly linked with agencies providing help in those areas. And we've heard how important the link between mental health, systemic family interventions and social work teams can be from the Anna Freud presentation. So consultation is necessary to manage the boundaries of what practitioners can tackle, what needs to be referred, and multi-agency planning is a crucial part of any safeguarding work. So how did we go about developing the approach? We worked with Bruce Chorpita from UCLA, who presented here last year, to analyze the common elements from around 40 intervention approaches which are available in the literature. And we then integrated these into a set of modules using a variety of helpful approaches to deliver effective practice elements. So that when we looked at what were the common elements from physical abuse and emotional abuse, from neglect, from sexual abuse, we then said, well, how could we help practitioners to deliver the elements that were evidently effective for those different forms of maltreatment? So we used modules from the approach by Chorpita, which is the modular approach to children with anxiety, depression, trauma and conduct problems, such a common impairment of children subject to abuse. We've already heard from Jane about the value of parent interaction therapy, which is to do with the direct modifications of relationships between parents and children. The work from alternatives for families of physical abuse, where there's a linking of both cognitive, behavioral, and systemic approaches, which again are so effective with physical abuse. Multisystemic therapies, we know, integrates a number of different approaches. The trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy for children and young people who have themselves had serious traumatic symptoms, improving parent-child interaction using attachment-based approaches, the circle of security, modifying disruptive behavior, again, comparable interventions from CBT and multi-systemic therapy. In practice, there are always combinations of abuse and neglect and a combination of approaches. This is what marks, I think, intervention in this field. I've already mentioned that we found the use of the assessment framework vital, and with our designer's help, we've introduced a rather different way of configuring the assessment framework. So you can see here on the left are the children's developmental needs, which are ranged around health, education, emotional, behavioral development, identity, social relationships, social presentation, self-care skills, the parenting that relates to that in terms of caring, providing safety, emotional care, boundaries, stability, and the family and environmental factors, which in turn have such an important impact on the capacity for parenting, whether it's individual functioning, couple functioning, extended family support from the community, and housing, income, and integration. And in terms of operationalizing the assessment framework, we find that it's possible to describe families in positive terms. A child's developmental needs are being met around the circle, thriving, good care, reflection of good care, growth, emotional responsiveness, compliant behavior, stability, learning, parenting, which again promotes positive responses around the circle, and family and environmental factors which help family functioning. We also can describe the family in where there's abusive and neglectful parenting. So we see children's whose development is poor, there's growth poor, there's emotional problems, there's traumatic symptoms, there's challenging oppositional behavior, there's failure to learn, there's aggression, sexually harmful behavior, poor self-presentation. And we see the parenting around this circle, where there's poor care, where there's lack of communication, where there's rejection, where there's emotionally harmful or abusive parenting, lack of stability, lack of stimulation, lack of a focus in the way that we've heard, and the factors around the circle that from the family and environmental factors, which in turn have a negative impact on the capacity to parent, personal issues from childhood, couple, family dysfunction, lack of support in the community, lack of integration, lack of services, and problems with housing, income, employment, all of which in turn have negative impact on the capacity to parent. So that sort of way of integrating the impact of neglectful parenting, the way in which the impact on children and young people, the impact of the parenting itself, and on the family factors, those were the areas which we needed to intervene on. Those, the modules which emerged from the distillation needed to be fitted around this circle, so that this fourth illustration demonstrates the sort of intervention which we need, the sort of work on parenting around this particular circle, helping parents understand the impact of abusive care, working to improve safety, working to improve the quality of care, emotional responsiveness, managing children's behavior, creating a context of stability, which in turn which in turn has an impact on children's, where there's exposure to violence, where there's poor growth, where there's nutritional failure, where there's emotional, traumatic symptoms, and where there are challenging behavior, sexually harmful behavior. Those in turn can be impacted, which are the effect of parenting difficulties, and in turn helping parents manage their own stressful problems, managing relationship difficulties within the couple, within the family, extending to support in the community. Those are all the sort of modules which are needed to address the sort of profile of harm that we see. So, to quickly look at one of the modules themselves, each module, which is self-contained, includes goals, a briefing for practitioners, a step-by-step approach to achieve goals, materials to support the development of therapeutic work, tools to assess the success of intervention, and guidance on the skills required to deliver the module and how modules can be integrated. So let's take one particular module, initial stages of work, engagement and hope. The module considers the sort of harmful impacts that abuse and maltreatment has on children's experiences. One questions whether parents have noticed and how they've explained the responses of children. The responses in an impairment that need to be tackled, the impact on the developing brain, the issue of responsibility for violence. And we provide a briefing module for practitioners so that they can understand the sort of issues which Jane has been referring to, the role of stress, positive stress, toxic stress, when is toxic stress evoked, and also the impact on neurobiological functioning, which Jane has also spoken about, so that we try to ensure that practitioners have a background and have an understanding of the sort of interventions which they then need to follow. So that, for example, with parents, the step is whether parents think a child has been affected by the harm they've experienced. We have a suggestion of scripts that we feel will help practitioners discuss these issues. How do you talk about the untalkable? Talking about the many different ways children can be harmed. What ways do they think their child has been harmed? Are there differences between the way that they see their children and others' perceptions? Differences within the family. What about the court or professionals? What do they seem to see? Pointing out that children remember more than parents do. What about their children? Ways in which children can be harmed. Does it apply to their children? Handouts listing common ways in which children can get hurt. Do they apply? Then, is love enough? Is a safe environment and responsive individuals sufficient? Do children need special help? Is it helpful if children are still in danger? How can ways in which we can help children overcome fears, gain confidence? Helpful for parents to acknowledge harm. Will that help them take a more responsive role? So these are the sorts of steps which we advocate would be helpful for parents to recognize harm that children have experienced. Then also, of course, we need to have psychoeducation with children themselves, helping children to gain an understanding of how they've been affected, exploring the fact that responses may be understandable but may be unhelpful now, such as sexualized responses, helping the child correct any misattributions or misperceptions, create a coherent story of their experience and a positive sense of self. And then, of course, another level is to do in the family, to clarify, share, and reconcile the impact of abusive and neglectful parenting. So all family members need to construct a timeline of episodes of parenting to clarify, take responsibility. look to take into account harmful impacts and harmful consequences, to provide a context where a family meeting can be convened with children, supportive caretakers, and those responsible to take responsibility and plan a safe future. Those are some of the modules which are within this resource pack. So let's have a look at how this might apply to a particular family. The Green family is a family which we described in our book, Living with Abuse and Harm, and I've developed it to see how would a modular approach help. In this family, we had Jack, age 48, Leslie, 41. There was a presentation to professionals through a prolonged failure of children's school attendance, an increasingly neglected appearance. Common reference that we heard earlier. Charlie, aged 13, had markedly poor school attendance, neglected. He was taking responsibility for the younger children. An intense sexual activity with Sarah and siblings was revealed. David was a 10-year-old, again, poor school attendance, neglected, frozen, rigid, immature, delayed language, made to participate in sexualized activity, intense closeness with Leslie. Sarah, an 8-year-old, had neglected appearance, highly sexualized, behaving inappropriately with other children, yet competent. Jack, a 4-year-old, neglected. He holds a doll continuously. Poor language development, extreme oppositional behavior, and again involved in the sexual activities. The parents had long-standing conflict, criticism. Father was increasingly resentful, spending increasingly time out of the home. Mother depressed, unable to cope, retreats to bed, leaving care to Charlie. An atmosphere of neglect, poor care, poor boundaries, hopelessness, children fending for themselves, an unsafe, impoverished, chaotic, unhappy environment with unresolved arguments and conflict. Carrying out a systemic analysis following the sort of approach which we advocate as part of our safeguarding assessment, it was evident that the early relative stability in the family was maintained by mother's family, supporting the family functioning and care. Professional intervention had helped maintain family organization, supplementing parental failures. The precipitating factors were increasing parental separation, conflict about the support the family had given, parents not working together, father's absence, mother overwhelmed with depression, isolation, absence of social support. The profile of harm, significantly sexually abusive behavior, sexualized traumatic symptoms, all children organized to be part of the sexualized responses, privation, neglect, lack of boundaries, appropriate care, disorganization, failure to attend school, opposition, developmental failure, care, stormy, emotional, insecure attachment responses. The maintaining factors were the failure of parents working together, long-standing conflict, grievance, lack of intimacy, mother's lack of capacity to organize family life or satisfactory care, and a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. Protective factors were Sarah's capacity to evoke a positive response from her mother and her competence and interest in education, learning, and relationships. The growth of all children was satisfactory. Nutrition was satisfactory, despite willingness to seek help by mother and a wish to provide for care, acknowledging her failure and an awareness of Charlie's abusive behavior. Father maintained work. There were phases of support by the wider family, limited acknowledgement on his part of the significant failure of care. Our safe analysis conclusions, without going through all the details, was that there was a high level of risk. There were overall high levels of risk of abuse and a likelihood of future harm. The overall prospect for successful intervention, very poor prospects for Charlie and David. We felt there was a moderate prospect for Sarah and David with mother if father was excluded. Trial of intervention of the younger children with mother, father living separately, agreed by the family and in court. So, using our modular approach, we have a flow chart which we advocate of modules which can be used flexibly in terms of the profile. So that on the left-hand side we see there's a phase of engagement, of goal setting, of working out with the protection service and with mother what were the goals, trying to help her understand why there were concerns and what were the sort of approaches which were helpful in terms of parenting. And then to follow through a process of modules which looked with her at what were the sort of, starting at the top, with actually how could mother herself cope with her own sense of stress? What were the origins which led her to retreat, and working with her GP in terms of her depressive symptoms, what were the sort of factors which really she could cope herself in terms of the stress that led to her withdrawal? Very important, the next stage, which is to enhancement of safety, the fact of her withdrawal, which meant that the younger children were expected to fend for themselves, the dangers in the home. How could she create a safe environment? Moving on to how could she provide better quality of care, using our review of the past 24 hours to see what were the areas where care was lacking, and creating a collaborative approach to actually improving care by working in the home. Developing positive attachments, given that there were elements of more secure attachments earlier with Sarah, but obviously this extreme avoidant, disorganized attachment by John, working with her to improve attachments, working with her to help her promote the development of the children's speech and language, promoting issues of how to manage contact with the children who were in alternative care. How could she really begin to work with the children in terms of behavior, managing positive parenting, and promoting the children's development. Thanks. Of course, that's working with parenting. But of course, that isn't sufficient. Modules are going to be necessary, focused on the children themselves. And I think we've heard from Minna and Duncan how important both the work on parenting, child interaction, and on children themselves. So we have a whole set of working with Sarah, who had such evidence of sexualized behavior, helping her gain a sense of safety, understanding how to cope, how to manage relationships with other children in school, how to create a sense of competence, how to develop her own interests, and of course focusing on the traumatic symptoms through a focusing on managing traumatic symptoms, managing to develop a coherent trauma narrative, and to be supported to manage sexualized behavior. And of course, the boys themselves would need very much on their disruptive behavior. All three of the children have problems with sexualized behavior. So we have modules to try to help parents work with children under the age of 12 with sexualized behavior or over, and how to actually help the family where there has been such serious sexual abuse. So with a program of work, relationships, and clear ways of measuring change, we can assess whether Leslie can care for her two younger children. In the original case, she was able to achieve that, and the actually working in this sort of way certainly gives a potential to access and to work with the multiple impact of neglect. So we look forward to working with you to see whether this approach works in practice. And I think we have a little time for more general discussion of this part of the program. So thank you very much indeed. So, could we have some general points that people would like to raise with Jane or myself, or any comments about any points they'd like to raise in this last 10 minutes?
It's just a general point, I think, about the importance of attachment, and I think social workers, some may be excellent, but I think many don't have the skills to recognise or to work with attachment, either with very small children or indeed adolescents. I'm increasingly concerned about the government's austerity agenda, where we're cutting back on youth work when there's a massive opportunity with teenagers and that time of neuroplasticity, where we can actually not just support adolescents, but we can actually fix some of the things that went wrong. So it's just a plea really about trying to get some of this better than we're doing it at the moment. We have to be better.
I think it's a fundamental failing in a lot of our training programs, actually. I mean, I think this material should be a core part of the training of all practitioners, but it's a significant deficit in the training of social workers, and I absolutely agree about the opportunities for working positively. Absolutely. It'll be interesting to see how it's used, actually, and who uses it. So we've got the app that can be downloaded by parents, but then we've also got a website that is got all the films uploaded and materials and other references for practitioners as well. And it'll be available in about a month's time. We'll circulate. I can't remember what the name of the website's going to be, and it doesn't work yet, but it's imminent. So about a month from then it'll be out there.
Yes, I think having availability in a number of different ways is important, and we're certainly hoping that the approach that I talked about will be available as an interactive form, also as the mega texts which are part of the whole approach.
Superb.
Right, I think that's me.
It was just more of an observation, really, and a slight concern. I'm from a social work background and worked for a local authority social work for 12 years, and then I moved to work in children's centres because I saw that as a place where the prevention of neglect should be happening. And we've only heard one mention about children's centres all day, and it was not a very positive comment that, I understand the comment you were making, but I suppose what your point is that without the level of skill and training in the children's centres, they're never going to reach their potential. And I'm just wondering what's happening about that from your perspective.
Well, I think actually... Thank you. I mean, I think what we actually need is skilled social workers and, practitioners, psychologists, parent-infant psychotherapists, people with that level of expertise, located in children's centres, where many of these families are sitting, a captive audience. Not all of them, but significant number. And I think we could do quite a lot of prevention if we had better skilled staff in there. So it's really
so that is happening in the children's centre where I work, where they've made that decision to employ that level of staff.
But actually,
clearly
what's
it's not happening across the board.
Is the opposite of that. So we're withdrawing funding from children's centres. So actually, they're struggling to maintain the existing staffing structures. Not only they're not putting more staff in there, they're hard to maintain what staff we've got. So it's time of hardship, isn't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's why it's so important to have the availability through different media of approaches which actually can help people at many different levels to really to actually deliver and to be able to provide help despite a context of privation which perhaps we families are having to struggle with.
Coming from a background in educational psychology, I'm very concerned by the rise in the number of very young children who are being diagnosed as autistic, when my assessment of the situation would be that it's actually the parenting that is causing the behaviour that we're seeing. The difficulty being that once you've got the diagnosis of autism, it sort of exonerates the parent and the problem is seen as firmly located within the child. And just welcome your comments on that.
Arnon, I think probably you're better equipped.
Well, I think that on the one hand, there's no doubt, is there, that recognition of children in the autistic spectrum can be extremely helpful because of their needs for a more focused specialist services. But on the other hand, as you say, the failure to see that adversity can actually have a very negative effect on children in the autistic spectrum, just as they can with any child. And the importance of carrying out a full assessment, of really having a full understanding of both the issues to do with the child, to do with the parent, and the family context, as you say, is an oversimplification, and the wish to make the problem in the child, whether it's ADHD or whether it's an autistic spectrum, I think represents a failure of full understanding of the context of the child and family and environment. I think perhaps that's a very good question for us to finish for today, where we keep coming back to the importance of the relationship of the child, of the family, and the environmental context. I'd really like to thank all the speakers who have really given us a very rich feast today, and to you for attending, despite the fact that we have this amazing summer at last. But thank you all very much indeed, and thank you to the speakers and all our colleagues who helped to organize the event. So thank you all very much indeed.